Welcome to the Dork Forest. Jackie and her pals will never bore us. Shameless confessions
about our obsessions
will make us laugh and smile. So let's explore the Dork Forest and dork out for a while.
Hi, this is Jackie Cation. Welcome to the Dork Forest. Guess what? It's June and we have a sponsor, and the sponsor is TiVo. And if you don't know about TiVo, well, that's odd to me because Patton Oswalt did a joke about it a million years ago because TiVo was the first DVR as far as I could tell. And it was about how it was the greatest gift he had ever received. Greater even than the gift of life. I'm going to put a link to that joke in the notes. Anyway, but before TiVo, you had to watch TV when it was on. You had to VHS record it, possibly. You might remember those days. But if you missed it or part of it, you had to wait for reruns until you saw it again. So TiVo, it changed all that. And there are other DVRs, but TiVo is clearly the best. TiVo makes TV 1,000 times better. That's their slogan. I believe it. I'm excited about TiVo, quite honestly. But TiVo has TiVo Stream, where you can watch it on your iPad or all over the house, right? You can transfer your favorite recordings and take them with you, like on airplanes and buses and not in your car. Please don't watch television in your car. TiVo is also the only one that searches both cable and the web to find any movie, any show, any video at the press of a button, right? Including YouTube, like Netflix, Hulu Plus, Amazon, YouTube. Now they're just like more channels on your TV. And TiVo Mini makes your TiVo box work on a second TV in your house. So that is the TiVo ad. And I'm excited that TiVo sponsor the Dork Forest this month. And I'm going to get a TiVo dork and we're going to do an episode. Hello, Greg Proops. Welcome to the Dork Forest.
Thank you, Jackie. It's awfully verdant in here.
Is it verdant?
Yes.
What does that mean?
Green.
There we go.
Like that.
It is green.
It's a whole
dork. Yeah, we got the Dork Forest. You picked your shirt. You get a free shirt when you do the Dork Forest, and you went with the green Brett Chambers fan designed Dork Forest, which has Elvish on the bottom.
Oh, that's what that language was. I was wondering what
Yes. I don't speak Kenya myself, so I don't have the pronunciation. My Latin's better.
Is Elvish from like the Lord of the Rings Elvish?
Yes, it's what Aragorn says when he finds the white tree at the end of the Return of the King. Yes.
Wow. And I love that the elves, for however, mystical and ancient their culture was, use regular exclamation points as we do.
They did. They
to overemphasize elvish excitement.
When they were on Twitter, they used it a little too much. It was the hashtag.
Too many characters in elvish.
It was hashtag Elrond was here. Gone.
I just watched The Hobbit on a plane a couple of weeks ago. I hadn't seen it.
Right.
And it ends before it ends. That's what blew my mind. Like, they took forever to make this picture.
Right.
And then it ends before they get to the treasure with the dragon.
Sure, that's because what they did is they took a bunch of they took some unpublished stuff. They took a bunch of stuff from the appendices from Lord of the Rings, so you can get backstory on the dwarves and all this stuff. Instead of it's just not the journey back again, it's the whole thing. They're going to go, which I thought that I liked it better than Lord of the Rings, actually.
I did too.
The Hobbit.
I was more interested.
Yeah.
The second and third ones get real long, and there's way too many CGI'd orcs for my taste. Like, when they pull back and it's just thousands of people milling around. Yeah. I'm like, characters. That's what we like.
Let's meet an actual orc. What's his life like?
Right.
Does he have a family? Does he have dinner? What's happening?
The few times you get to see them talk, then you get, like in the book, I remember reading the trilogy in high school.
Right.
You know, I would come home and be high, and I would read. It was really popular when I was in high school back in the 30s.
Right.
And,
excellent. That's all you had during the Depression.
Yeah. Oh no, that's just that, and playing Monopoly on a checkerboard tablecloth because we didn't have cardboard.
Right. And use pennies.
Yeah.
But just one.
Yeah, just pennies. Yeah. Right. Instead of they didn't have the Scotty dog and the cannon. Why was there a cannon?
Right.
But I thought The Hobbit, I didn't love the guy who played Bilbo. He was okay. But when it stopped before they got to the dragon, I was like, the whole part of the book when you're little is that there's the whole scene with the dragon, and the dragon talks to him and has never met a hobbit before.
Right.
And,
he doesn't know what he smells like.
There's all this gold, literal gold that he's hiding, but all this sort of plot gold that I thought, give me 20 more minutes. But then it had already gone on at that point. I was on a coast-to-coast plane flight, and I barely finished the bloody movie, right? Like, it's
right, because it's 3 hours.
Yeah, it's oh my God. Talk about liftoff. It takes a year to get out of the the Shire, you know.
Right. They did.
They do the whole dinner party with the song and everything.
And they, a lot of we get to see, dwarves with beards, dwarf ladies. Did you get to see the dwarf ladies with beards?
Oh my God. I've learned more about dwarvish culture than I ever knew.
Or you thought you'd ever want to know.
That I thought I'd ever want to know.
Well, of course, Tolkien, I'm spacing the word right now. That when he studied language, philologist. I think
was he? Yeah,
he was a philologist.
Oh yeah, well he created Elvish and all that, right?
And created Elvish and created all these things and and it came from all these ancient texts,
sure.
Obviously, clearly. But I have always loved The Lord of the Rings. But we were going to talk about Rome.
Oh, okay. Let's talk about Rome. One last bit on Tolkien.
Yeah, sure.
He was a World War I veteran, and he had a very horrible time in World War I, as so many did.
Did he have a hard war?
Yeah, that Great War, as we call it, and the black cloud coming around the earth and all that.
Yeah.
That's taking hold of Middle Earth and all that. Everybody always thought it was an analogy for World War II because he finished it in the 60. When did it come out?
52, I think.
But it wasn't. In his, I've read things about him where he said, no, it's utterly about World War I. He detested the telephone and he detested cars.
Right.
Like he's a real hobbit. Like,
he's a simple man of the people.
Yeah.
He just
Books
wanted
and
his
pipes
garden.
And want to read. I want to,
Yeah. And he also, he so clearly said several times that he didn't like metaphors. And he was like, it wasn't a metaphor for anything. And you're like, everything's a metaphor for something.
Of course.
What you lived through permeates your fiction, right? Yes. How could it not, you big weirdo? I mean, I get it. You don't want everyone going, is Gandalf Jesus? And he comes back to life.
Because he comes back, because he returns and he's...
Spoiler alert. If you haven't read that book from the 50s.
No, he didn't like metaphor. It's interesting. I think he thought he was writing a straight-up fairy story in The Hobbit and then The Lord of the Rings. But like you say, you can't... Your life experience informs everything you write.
Everything you write. So how are you supposed to... It's like some of my worst stand-up, I look back at it and I'm like... Oh, that's because that didn't have anything to do with me.
Right.
That didn't, that all I was making fun of that punk rock song or whatever.
Well, that letter that you keep in your house about how to be a stand-up, I was perusing it briefly again. And it's just so well written and so perfect. And that one sentence, Kanda, is it?
Vanda.
Vanda says, Kanda. I went Lord of the Rings.
Right.
This is Kanda. This is Vanda. Landa. Shenanda. If they were dwarves, they don't have.
Her and her 12 sisters.
Yeah.
Yes.
Everything has to be about don't push the creative process. It'll happen when you grow.
Yeah.
Because you want it to be about you.
Yeah.
And, I've said it a million, so boring, but Bill Hicks said less jokes and more me.
Right.
Right. And,
right.
And I find like when we finally get to the podcast level, which we're so lucky to live in the podcast era.
It's true.
That it's more us and less pushing,
you could just be, and then people are naturally very funny or interesting, and if you just allow that, then that, and granted, some people do 2.5 hour podcasts and you're like, you could do a little line veto on that. Feel free to edit a little bit, but podcasts,
I'm as guilty of that as anyone else.
And because the smartest man in the world is Greg Proops' podcast and everyone should listen to it. And GregProops.com?
Yes.
All right, there we go. So, but podcast listeners are so patient.
Yeah, they are.
I think as they're sitting at work going, anything that isn't what's right in front of me would be fantastic.
Absolutely. I sometimes I do an hour one, or like when I'm in Edinburgh, the time allotted is an hour.
Okay.
So they come in at 56 minutes or whatever.
And they're like, wrap it up.
Well, yeah. Oh yeah. And you have to finish, right? Cause there's another show coming on or whatever. The crew's done. And, people, write me and go, hey, I got a 2-hour commute. Like their personal need.
Right.
They go,
right.
What happened? It was only an hour. It's like, isn't an hour enough, really? I mean, I do 2 hours a lot or more, an hour and a half, but, I find brevity is probably something to be treasured.
I'll tell you, I just did one with Janine and Maria Bamford, and, Garofalo wouldn't stop talking to start the podcast.
Right.
I had to hit record and go, we're starting now. And then at the end of it, I had to go, we're stopping now. And then I hit stop. And somebody said, well, why don't you just keep going? And I was like, because I'm tired.
Yeah.
I'm Madeline Kahn tired.
Yeah.
I can't fucking keep talking about beads for more than an hour.
Well, Janine has that ability, right? She's always on a monologue that
she is available. She's available to chat. It is awesome.
Yeah. She's amazing.
Yes. And it was so funny because I was like, no, we're done. It's good.
Yeah. And she's still talking.
She's still talking.
Yeah.
And she hung out for an hour and a half and with comics out in front, had a cigarette and just talked for another hour and a half. Yeah. And now I'm sure Rangers of the Dork Forest are like, should have just kept it running. Just should have kept it running.
Well, I mean, also the people that want to hear Janine, and it was true about her more than almost any comic I can think of 20 years ago. If I can date us a little bit. Sure. Janine's a little younger than I am. Thank goodness, who isn't, was always, and Paula Poundstone before her, cause I grew, as a young comedian in San Francisco, Paula was the king of my town. Yeah. Mm-hmm. She worked the crowd like nobody ever worked the crowd. Yeah. But her crowd really wanted to see her. They had emotional investment in her. And Janine's crowd's always had that emotional connection to her.
The same, yeah.
Yeah, they're, maybe not needy is the wrong word, but,
just connected.
What's the symbiotic relationship?
Right, right.
They're there and they sit and they, I did a chat show in, Bumbershoot several years ago and I got Janine to do the show. And the place was packed an hour before, right? Because they knew Janine was going to be on.
Yeah.
And then, she did her usual. She brought up politics and all kinds of things.
Right.
And when it turned into gags and Doug Benson came on with Ted Berry and all this stuff. But, yeah, so you could have made a 4.5-hour Janine show, and the people that love Janine would be listening. Oh yeah,
the entire time, going. Yeah. I listened to it for the third time, and she said this one thing,
right?
And you're like, yes, I bet she did. And
right, they're pounding it in copper sheets. They're recording it.
Right. Yeah. Bamford's fans are like that too.
Maria's I agree. Band. Yeah,
they are on board with the Maria Bamford experience.
They're also emotionally available and always were. They're vulnerable, Yeah. And there's something you want to take care of them, but that they don't need help.
They don't need help, but you so want to be there for them.
Yeah.
And they're like, it's neat. And they both give their fans a good amount of time too. Janine is not online. She does not have Twitter, Facebook, or an email.
Good for her. I appreciate that.
So do I. I like the commitment. She said to me on the show, I don't have a website. And then I Googled JanineGarofalo.com. Turns out someone made a website and it's got all of her dates on it. So, there is a JanineGarofalo.com.
Well, that's like you say, people are devoted. I mean, her fans are certainly devoted.
And I'm sure her people, management at some level were like, yes, there will be a Janine Garofalo.
Not being on Twitter is an interesting call. Mm-hmm. I wish I could get away with it, but I find that we have to because we're promoting our podcast all the time. And that's what I use Twitter for most of all.
Right. And and it's not so, I've started following a bunch of people now, which I love following a million people.
Me too.
Because then it just keeps going and keeps going. The only thing I don't like about it is that it's another way for people to direct message me, like Facebook messaging. Yeah. And I'm like, just email me. Swear to God, attainable goal, Jackie@JackieCation.com.
Yeah.
I don't want to check 19 different places to make sure I'm responding to everything. And then if people want to book me to do their crazy coffee shop, which I am also available to do, Twitter is not the way to do it. Jackie@JackieCation is the way to do it.
I'd much rather be emailed.
Yeah, just because it's easier. And
well, you're going to check it.
Yeah, and I'm probably going to have my book in front of me, which, by the way, is a piece of paper.
Well, see, that's the thing. I have a book too with a piece of paper, and that's where I keep everything. I don't put it in my phone.
I don't.
I lost my phone about 2 months ago, and I had a heart attack. And
right,
like if I kept everything in the phone, I would just die.
It'd be even worse. Yeah, and that's crazy. So I took Latin.
Okay.
For 5 years, I took.
So how's your Latin?
It sucks. But written in the beginning of my Latin book in high school was that I was on loan, of course, because they just it was high school, so you didn't have books. They gave you books. It said Latin is dead as can be, first to kill the Romans, now it's killing me. It's a classic. Did you take Latin?
I did not, but my mother told me she did, and that it helped her when she learned to speak Pidgin Spanish, basically.
Well, good for her.
Yeah. It is a helpful root language. I mean, I don't even know that it was their first language. I don't know where it came from.
Probably
but I mean,
not.
It's so influential. People don't think that we're connected to the Romans at all, but of course we are, metaphorically. But, I was going to say, is your Latin sine qua non, and it's not. Latin words get used all the time.
Right.
You're always hearing habeas corpus. You're always hearing, well, for goodness sakes, the money says e pluribus unum on it.
Right on it.
Which is, why?
Why?
That's got to be some sort of,
it's a conspiracy.
Right.
Clearly.
It's a mystical,
We'll
thing.
get Rick Overton on. We'll talk about it.
Because why is it one out of many?
Why is it one out of many?
That's what e pluribus unum is.
Right.
And you're like, why is that on the money? And why is there a pyramid with an eyeball on it?
Right.
But I mean, that's the influence the ancient world has. To go even further and make it even more tedious. And we have all the dork forest time in the world.
All the dork forest time in the world.
I don't have a dollar bill on me, but on your dollar bill.
Only 20s. That's how Greg Proops
rocks. I know,
rocks.
right? Yeah, I have $100 bills and fresh roses. Well, there it was kind of there too. But the seal of the United States is that eagle. But there also sometimes you see it when the president stands at his podium.
Yeah.
The eagle's holding 2 clusters of arrows. That is so Roman. The Romans, absolutely, the imperial eagle is the symbol of ancient Rome. And every time you ever see a Roman movie, there's always people with standards. Yeah. And on those standards are giant eagles. The Nazis borrowed it. Yep. They use an eagle. The only country that doesn't use an eagle that I can think of is England. France uses an eagle. Russia has a weird double-headed eagle. Germans have an eagle. Mm-hmm. America uses an eagle. Right. That's all from the empire. The influence of that eagle holding what they would have called a fasces, which is a bundle of sticks together. Right. Our eagle's holding arrows, right? And there's always Latin under everything. But why? It's been 2,000 years, and we're still doing all these imperial things. Kaiser and Tsar
and from Caesar, right?
Yeah.
Here's what I've always wondered about Rome is, were there people sitting around Rome at the end days of Rome talking about the end days of the Egyptian Empire, going, I wonder if they knew if it was the end. When the Goths were coming.
I expect they were.
Yeah.
I think they were because they were, studied and because they lifted so much of their culture from all the cultures that preceded them. They're a weird amalgam of different cultures.
Which is so much like the United States. Yeah. Which is so, I mean, we're.
And the militarism. I mean, that's right? Pax Romana and Pax, Americana.
Nice and rhyming.
The idea that there's this giant sphere of influence that you just hold. And the Romans set borders, right? They would go so far. Like they never went all the way to Scandinavia. They stopped in Germany, and they never went all the way to Iran. They stopped just short, and they didn't go down into Africa because that's where they're afraid barbarians were. Now, they labeled everyone a barbarian that was a stranger. Right. And I think I don't know where it comes from. I want to say it's Berber, bastardization of Berbers, because they did fight in Morocco. Right. But it's probably some other derivation. In any case, the barbarians weren't barbarians. A lot of the people they vanquished, a lot of the people they crushed, and a lot of the people they fought were highly developed cultures with their own personal belief systems, money, technology.
Roads. Yeah.
They were, I mean, they whomped on the Gauls for 10 years till they finally subdued all of them. And it was hundreds and hundreds of tribes. And it wasn't just French people. There were Belgians and Germans and the whole fight. But those people weren't backward. They liked to post like everybody didn't know anything till they got there. Right. Like these people didn't know how to bathe or cook till we showed them how and stuff, which is always how America approaches everywhere. Our imperialism was,
we're helping.
We're helping. Right. Yeah. We're going to make your country better, like Afghanistan and Iraq, which are both unbelievably volatile right now. And there's no stability at all because of what we've done to them.
Right.
And I think that the people the Romans fought often felt, well, fuck you, we had a culture. Greece, who they were able to take over, their culture had waned. They were big, 500 years before. So,
so they were pale.
They were susceptible, to the Romans coming in and just.
And the Romans were like, well,
everything.
Part of that is cute. So what we're going to do is we're going to co-opt some of that. It's like.
We want your theater.
Right.
We want your learning. If you had any money at all, and you were a Roman, you had your children tutored by Greeks.
Oh, really?
And doctors were almost always Greek because they invented medicine, right? They invented Hippocrates and Asclepius and all that jazz.
And they had all that guy. It's, the United States, it's nice. What we tend to do is we open up a lot of Vietnamese restaurants. Right after.
We get the food.
We get their food. We're just like, no, we're willing to bring a chili. Bring a chili over.
I'm waiting for the Iraqi restaurants to pop up everywhere.
You know where they are?
Where?
In Michigan.
Of course. Right.
Right. Because they have all those.
They get the Iraqis. See, California, it's Vietnam. We got all the Vietnamese.
We get Vietnamese. We get, in Minneapolis, they get Ethiopians.
Oh,
and
fantastic.
Somalis.
Right. Yeah. From their epic troubles.
Right. From that horrible genocide. Yes.
Yeah. And then in Alberta, they're getting Sudanese.
Oh, yeah?
And then Iraqis apparently are flooding into, you saw the riots this week in Sweden last week.
No.
They're
riots in Sweden?
They're a homogeneous culture. Like they're white,
start to finish.
And, in the last few years, they've had a lot of people move in and they put them in projects and, they fucking burned the town down for 5 days. A cop killed someone and it started that way, like it always does.
Like it always does.
A little too much, force.
Yes.
Excessive force. But I think the Romans, their big, I don't know, they're failing. Their achievement is that one end of Europe to the other was connected, and that you could theoretically take roads almost the whole way, right? And Hadrian, who was a later, in the hundreds,
right,
and most certainly gay, traveled the length and breadth of the empire several times. He was the most traveled of all the.
But Hadrian, was he an emperor?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because
the wall.
Oh, the Hadrian's Wall. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
It was, and there was a giant fight about Hadrian's Wall, or was there the wall? Did he just build the damn wall? My Roman
They built
history.
several walls, but the Hadrian's Wall is the furthest one. And it does not really in Scotland. It's in like the north of England.
That's it. It's in the British Isles.
And that's how far they went. I mean.
And they didn't get into Scotland, and that was a big thing for the Scots.
They left the Scots, yeah.
Right.
They left the Scots alone. Instead, they built a 16-foot wall that ran the length of the country. From the River Tyne in Newcastle on one end to the other end of the country. Now it's about 4 feet tall.
Okay.
And it didn't
Has
disappear.
there been settling?
No, the people of the area have used it to build with for 2,000 years. That's
they've
why
just taken there's a hole in my wall. I'm going to grab a brick off of here.
Everything
and stick
around the Hadrian's Wall is made of Hadrian's Wall. Which is awesome.
That is awesome.
And they used to post colonial troops. There was always very few Romans in the legions once they got up and running. In the beginning, you had to be Roman. And then they extended it to Italian. And then they extended it to citizens. And so by the time they made everyone a citizen, we're talking about from Baghdad to almost to Scotland, right?
Oh,
so a lot of territory from Germany down to Morocco.
And almost
Libya.
anyone could become a citizen?
If you were within their sphere, yeah. I mean, like, the reason why Paul in the Bible doesn't get executed is he's the publican, right? A publican is a tax official that is paid by the Roman government who privatized tax officials. That's how they get collected taxes.
Right.
He's a Roman citizen.
Okay.
So he can't be executed.
Okay.
Peter, on the other hand,
yes,
didn't do as well. But so there's the Bible kind of there's lots of Roman stuff in the Bible because it's the age of Tiberius when Jesus is purportedly happens.
Right. And Paul was the one who wrote all those letters, right?
Yes, he wrote the letters to the Corinthians
and the Corinthians and the Ephesians and the
Ephesians.
That guy was chatty and he was a bossy Magoo.
Well, I love letter writing, right? Like they wrote letters.
Yes.
So they had a delivery system. Caesar apparently had 2 scribes that rode behind him
at all times.
Pretty much, he wrote several books. There's one called the War Against the French, the Gallic Wars, and then there's one he wrote about the revolution that he fought against Pompey, or when he tried to take over as, dictator or whatever.
Oh, right.
And then he wrote another one as well, but he dispatched them, and they were pure spin. He had 2 guys, and they scribed all the time, and he dictated on the trot.
Yes.
And then those were put back into, in manuscripts or tubes in those days. There was no such thing as.
Right, they'd roll up the papyrus
books
and
were rolls.
boom. Yeah.
And they'd boom back to Rome. Then they'd post them in the town square, and criers would read them out, and they were read in front of the Senate to say, I'm so awesome. Yesterday we vanquished the Gaverni, or yesterday we did this, and yesterday we did that. And he minimized his losses, and he amplified his wins.
Sure.
So some of the figures that he fought against, Vercingetorix, the most famous of them, was a French king, kind of an elected king. Only thing we know about them is what the Romans wrote, because there's no extant stuff about them. You have to piece together their belongings.
What's the name of the French king?
Vercingetorix is the one that has the helmet that has the feathers on it, like asterisk and obelisk.
Oh, okay.
From the cartoon book.
Okay.
They wear the helmets that have the backward feathers on them.
Like Hermes?
Yeah.
Okay.
He was supposed to be a big, good-looking Frenchman, and they put this giant army together to fight the Romans, and the Romans have been there for years at this point, like 7-8 years. And they took a big hit at a heedless little battle. Caesar's biggest strength was he was a tremendous tactician, right? He took basically several legions and subdued a country with millions, tens and 20s of millions of people, and killed probably 1 million. He did some big genocide on the French.
Pretty sweeping.
Yeah. And, but he did not have an army that was overwhelming. And they had a bigger army than him, but they were not organized the same way a legion was. Now, if you're a legionary, you learned to be in the army. You were provided with, material, weapons, training, tactics. Mm-hmm. They formed testudo, and they'd all put their shields up to go into when there was too many missiles flying at them. Yeah. They formed squares. They knew how to flank. They weren't very cavalry oriented. They were very infantry oriented.
Okay.
And they fought in ranks. So they stood behind one another and held the guy in front of them, right? And then your centurion would blow a whistle, and that rank would fade back,
Okay.
And the next rank stepped forward. So that's how they fought on the line, right? So when the barbarians come at you,
right.
you've got your shield, right?
Yep.
Where you're holding it by the boss.
Yep.
And you've got your, gladius, right?
Yep.
The short sword the Romans used.
Okay.
And so the first line fights for a minute or two, and hand-to-hand combat's extraordinarily wearying. In the movies, like in Lord of the Rings, or even in The Hobbit, they hand-to-hand fight for ages and ages. They're with giant swords and they're fighting. I was like, if you did that for 10 minutes,
right,
you'd be exhausted beyond.
Right.
And
You'd
imagine 50 people
over.
coming at you and rocks hitting you in the head and flaming, pitch and whatever.
Okay, so there was time.
Yeah. They'd blow a whistle, boom, here comes the next rank, and they go forward, and you faded to the back, and then the next rank comes forward. And in the back, people giving you water. There's water bears, there's people with arrows, there's...
Oh, like in marathons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they used lots
Gatorade?
of... They used lots of auxiliary troops, who were often colonials or people fighting against, like there was French troops, obviously, that fought for the Romans.
Okay.
And they always had Germans, and the emperors always had a German guard. That was their inner guard. They weren't even Romans. They were Germans, and so they were only... bore allegiance to the emperor. Right?
Okay.
So theoretically they couldn't be bought.
Right.
So the German guard was the inner sanctum of the palace guard.
Okay.
And, because they were giant. The Romans could never get over how big everybody was.
Right. No, up
like
north.
they were 6 feet tall with lots of hair.
Yeah.
So they're always depicted, and that's another obsession with Rome is, they're always clean shaven, like their chests, right?
Yeah.
Even though they're Italians.
Right.
They bathed a lot. The bath was a very big part of a day in Rome.
Right.
Even for poor people could afford to go to the bath. They kept it cheap. And you had sex in the bath. You ate in the bath. You did politics in the bath. it wasn't just sitting in a tub of water. There was a tubadarium.
Essentially like a coffee shop. Yeah.
It was, if everything that happened in American society happened in a spa is basically what Roman society was like. And men and women separate.
Right.
So they're always shaved.
Right.
The amount of, razors and tweezers and scissors that go away in the Middle Ages when the Roman Empire falls and then kind of come back in the Renaissance.
Right.
Like people just didn't groom the way the Romans groomed you. You see how Caesar had the Caesar haircut, right?
Yeah.
And he's kind of bald.
Yeah.
And then later Hadrian and some of the emperors start wearing beards, 100 years in. But really, they kept it clean for Gene, right? And you were covered in olive oil, no soap. And then you bathe, you go in the hot room, this cold room, back in the cold water. And a slave would wipe you off with a stick so that and then anoint you with oil so you smell good and musk and whatnot.
Wow.
So the gig was you went every day to the bath, you shaved completely.
Completely.
Oh yeah.
Totally. Like now.
Yeah. They shaved their chest, they shaved their face, they plucked their eyebrows, and the women wore wigs made of human hair. And
the privates as well?
I don't know I don't know that was a big obsession with them. I mean, the naked body is a different thing. The Greeks were much more comfortable with it. Like the Olympics were performed in the nude.
Were they?
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense.
But they had some equipment, like when they boxed, they wore like leather straps around their hands.
Okay.
And when they long jumped, they carried weights.
Okay.
So that they didn't just jump the way we jump, like, you see how they do a mad dashing and hit the board and fling.
Yeah.
They use 2 weights to fling themselves forward with.
To pull themselves.
Yeah. So all those sports, the Olympic sports that are obviously all the dashes and distance running, wrestling.
Yep.
The put.
Yep.
Then the hammer. And the javelin are all ancient games, right?
Right.
The javelin is
just a
so
spear.
old. Yeah. It's old.
That's the first pointy stick fight in the world.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the Romans used they had long ones that every legionary carried, and that was what they shot first.
Okay.
Before they got to the line, everybody let go their giant javelin. Okay. And then you fought up close and personal with a sword.
Right.
Hitting guys in the face, and you were always trying to cut open the lower part of their stomach.
Bleed out?
Yeah. So their guts would come out.
And then they would die
You
that
would
way.
stamp on their foot, stick them in the stomach, and then they're going to go down. And then they can't fight you anymore. And then you go to the next guy.
Right. Right.
You weren't trying to cut people's eyes out. They weren't, it's not like the movies. They, boom, I'm going to kick you in the balls and then, right in the giblets.
My father would completely approve of that. One time I wake up 9 a.m. My father has been beaten up.
Oh, no.
At the breakfast table. And I was like, what happened? I'm 9. He goes, I won the argument. I lost the fight. And I was like, you got to fight? And he was like, yeah, but whatever, Pulaski or whatever, it was a Polish name.
Yeah.
And he goes, he punched me, I fell down, he started kicking me. And I read a lot of Louis L'Amour at this time. And I was like, he kicked you when you were down?
Right.
And
Louis
my dad
L'Amour's
goes,
heroes don't do that.
No. My dad goes, yeah, that's what you do. You kick them when they're down so that they don't get back up.
Yeah.
Even when he's on the receiving end of the kicking, he knows this,
Right.
My
he
dad.
approved of the fighting methods.
He approved of the fighting method. He was like, then it was over. Don't worry about Then we're done. I don't have to get back up and fight.
Oh.
I was like, good Lord, Dad.
No, don't get back up, because you're just asking for it. Then you're asking for a beer bottle in the eye.
Right. Well, and my father's entire life is how close can he get to you punching him in the face to not punching him in the face.
Yeah. My dad was like that
He's a bit
too.
of a button pusher.
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah.
so
super aggressive.
Yeah, but he would appreciate the let's end the fight quickly.
Yeah, the style of Roman.
The style of Roman fighting.
Yeah.
Yes.
So they would overwhelm you with tactics. Like the famous battle in France is at Elysia, which is still there, and they've excavated it, and they've done X-rays from the sky and all that. So they've really tried to find where all the positions were. It was a hilltop town, so the French had a big army, and they all hid in the town.
Okay.
And they thought, we'll bring the Romans to us, because they beat them a couple months earlier at a battle where Caesar lost his shit a little bit and sent the troops in too quickly, and they got wiped out.
Uh-huh.
So he lost a bunch of legionaries, and which was a big slap in the face for your, like the Japanese, everything with Rome is pride and honor.
Right.
Everything's honor. So
yeah. Everything's got to look right.
Right. They often killed themselves, right? Suicide was a huge thing to Romans. You were expected to fucking, fall on your sword.
Right.
Right.
That's them. That's them, right? Okay.
And, all those things that Nixon's White House always talked about, falling on your sword in the Praetorian Guard and all that jazz. Because when you're protecting Caesar,
Yeah. You know what? Nixon should have fallen on his sword. He was buried in his backyard like a dog.
Is he really?
Yeah. That was Hunter S. Thompson joke.
Yeah, that's
He said,
great.
I couldn't have been more pleased. They buried him in his backyard like he was a dog.
Well, he's our most, broody, that movie, the one Ron Howard did a couple years ago, he really is like a exiled emperor, right? The way they've got him, the one with
Nixon
Frost and everything,
yeah.
because he's phoning him up in the middle of the night drunk, and he was king, and now he's, reduced to this state, and he's having to do a TV show to explain himself. And
right.
try to rewrite what he can rewrite, and
yes, how can we?
Which everybody wants the chance to do that.
Who doesn't love my stepmother loved a revisionist history.
Oh yeah.
Right? She was amazing in her own. She was Kissinger-like. She never went into Laos. It was perfect. It was
right.
Yeah,
we never did any of those things.
No.
We never started war for oil or drugs. We would only start wars because we're honorable.
Oh yeah, we're gonna help.
Yeah, we're gonna help. Well, that was the other thing, is like the Romans had no concept of, personal glory was an enormous motivating factor. So if you thought, well, I want to go and invade whatever, Parthia, Armenia, Egypt,
right.
I'm going to do it.
Okay.
I don't care that they're our friends. I don't care that they exist on their own,
That they have their own agenda?
Yeah, that they might not want us to stomp them.
So it was all the individual with Rome?
Well, I mean, it was part of when they first started, they were a republic, and they didn't have any kings, and they were really proud of that. And that lasted for, 700 years or whatever. They would elect people to lead them. They would, people were pressed into service that were farmers to fight. And then it got more and more organized, and they got more and more badass, and they started to take over more of Italy.
Right.
And then when they started to take over Italy, the big people they had to fight were Carthage, who was across the way in Africa.
That's
who
right.
were Phoenicians who'd moved to Africa, who live at the top of North Africa. And the Carthaginians were wildly advanced, and they invented writing.
Right.
And,
right.
But the knock on them
Alexandria?
was that they were practiced infanticide, which I don't know if it's wholly true, but they did like to kill a baby now and then.
And bad pub. Who knows where that came from, right?
So they fought 3 giant wars against them over the course of 100 years.
Right.
3 or 4, and then finally wiped out Carthage, and did a horrible thing in their last time they beat Carthage. They destroyed the entire city, and they sowed the ground with salt so that nothing could ever be there again, right? Now, there's still a Carthage there, but it's a later version. It's a Roman version.
Right.
And it's their Vietnam, right? They transgress too far. Like in American history, there's 2 or 3 wars there's the Holy Wars. There's World War II,
right,
which is holy to us.
Yes.
There's the Civil War, which is holy to us. But the Mexican War and Vietnam are wars where we encroached.
Yep.
We did it because we wanted to. It was, and we paid the moral price.
We bit off more than we could chew.
The gods came down on us for those wars.
Yeah.
And I think Carthage is the Roman one, because they feel like they didn't need to vanquish them so utterly. They could have let them live, and they didn't have to sow the ground with salt and make all those ancient gestures.
Well, do you think it's because they became too big? Like it's that thing where you can have a republic when it's 800,000 people or 100 million people. Like they say that the United States was freer in the 50s than it is today, because there was, there's 330 million people in the United States now?
And there was 200 million then, 150 million?
Yeah, so it was just easier to get off the grid. It was easier to just be.
And you didn't need an ID for anything, and there was no credit cards.
Right.
So there was no record of what you were buying.
Or selling.
And there was lots more independent businesses.
Right.
They just built the highway system.
Right, and you could and you had to live on what you had in front of you.
Right. There were places that were hard to get to. And people spoke different dialects way more than they do now.
Yeah.
Like the country was really divided up into what.
Yeah. The first time I went to Mississippi, everyone in Mississippi was like, is it like what you thought it'd be? And I was like, you guys get cable. Yeah. I thought it would be the same, and it is.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same.
There's a little more homogeneity. I mean, they were complaining about this 100 years ago, obviously. That once the wireless.
Let everybody know.
Once there was radios and telephones, people were like, oh, that's the end of that.
Yeah,
everyone's going to be the same now, yeah.
How are you going to keep them down on the farm?
When the printing press got widely used in Europe, people were like, well, that's the end of culture. Now everyone can read.
And anyone can write a book.
Right, and now anyone can print a bloody thing, and,
just
all of a sudden
Kindle.
people were pamphleting. I mean, that's the one thing that Romans don't have is their technologies, their engineering and their architecture are extraordinary. They're able to bring in water from faraway mountain peaks by using a various, gradient that kept it flowing at all times using the natural force of the water.
Right.
Rome had zillions of aqueducts going into it. There was fresh water everywhere. On every street corner there'd be like a little cistern. You see them when you go to Rome still. They're often big faces with a big mouth.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Like a little bubbler.
Yeah.
Like a little
bubbler.
Yeah.
And so everywhere they went, they put that in, and they still exist in Spain and France and Turkey, and you go anywhere there was Roman world, and the roads are still there. Yeah. The Appian Way is still there. Because they knew how to grade a road, they knew how to lay down the gravel and then put stones
it was several
on top
levels,
of it.
right? Yeah, they did.
So the water drained to the sides. They graded roads, so you could march those legions anywhere, and that was the initial. But of course, it opened up trade and it made Europe more close because Rome in the day that was cosmopolitan. There was people from all over the Roman world in Rome, including
because you could get
English
from one
people,
side of the
African
Roman Empire
people.
to the other in 3 months or something like that, or 6 months, or it was amazing.
Yeah,
right.
And they had a port, and there was loads of commerce and boats. They weren't as curious as they might have been about sailing across the Atlantic to find the New World.
Right.
That was left to other cultures, but certainly they would have had enough money and wherewithal to send fleets to the New World.
Right.
Now they say it was the Chinese, right, with that giant fleet in the Middle Ages that might have even got to America. Also, there's evidence that like Africans took boats to America.
Oh yeah,
and to the Caribbean. Yeah, before Columbus, certainly the Vikings did.
Have you done some reading about the Chinese and the Africans and their ancient cultures?
A little bit, but not nearly as much as Rome.
There's not as much written on it, and of course it isn't as publicized. So
well, they're not white people, and we don't live in that. If we were more influenced by China than we were the Romans, then we would be talking about China.
Right.
I mean, the Chinese invented everything. They had paper money. When Marco Polo went to China,
when was that? Like
in the 1200s.
Was it 1200s?
The Kublai Khan was the emperor.
Okay.
And China had an empire that went basically from the steppes of Europe all the way to Indonesia and Southeast Asia. Like
so
their
it went
empire
through the
was
entire
almost all of
Southeast
Asia. Yeah. He supposedly, Polo went to Vietnam, Polo went to, Khan loved him, and he spoke Chinese.
Okay.
And he spoke Mongol as well. And it wasn't an accident. His father and his uncle were Italian traders. They're from Venice. And so Venice was always seagoing. So Venice always dealt with the East. So if you could sail your boat to, the door of Asia, Turkey and up there, then you could take a land route all the way over the mountain. Right. And then there was the spice roads, all that crisscrossed China.
They crisscrossed,
because the Europeans desperate for spices and silk. And that's what they wanted from Asia.
And that's all they wanted.
Right. So his uncle and his father went there and came back. And when they came back, they spoke Mongol and they spoke Chinese. Marco was a teenager. Mm-hmm. They took him with him on a trip, and he was gone for 20 years. And he met the Great Khan, and the Great Khan loved him and took favor. He was a well-disposed young boy, as we say in the Middle Ages.
Excellent.
And he spent 20 years. Khan gave him a job. He became like a tax collector. He saw these giant floating cities. He saw fireworks. He saw eyeglasses. He saw them use coal for fuel and coal to power things. He'd never seen that. Right. He saw paper money. He'd never seen anyone write a check before. He was from Europe. Yeah. And they used bags of fucking gold and stuff. So the innovations the Chinese had, and they'd already perfected giant silk factories where silkworms were kept in tubs, and there hundreds of thousands of people working.
So Henry Ford Did not invent,
No,
possibly.
And, he was blown out of the water. Also the food, the European food, they always say he brought back noodles, right? And that's what vermicelli
and pizza
is. But he was blown out by the subtlety and the depth and the majesty of the Chinese cuisine. They had, everything had to balance with something else. There was sweet, there was sour, there was piquant, there was, there's, I don't know that much about it, but there's, whole charts and books and, it's a philosophy. Also, they had acupuncture. They had a giant philosophical system. They had
it was all preventative medicine. It wasn't, and they didn't do a lot of surgery.
So he was part of the Mongol Empire, and the Mongols were who were running the show then. But the Mongols had the Chinese under their subjection in this era. So he finally made his way back, and before he left, the Khan gave him a giant imperial seal, like a letter, basically, of transit. Please allow Marco Polo, don't fuck with him in any way, and you must give him, put him up for the night.
Right.
So he traveled back with a giant caravan, then took a boat, came all the way back through, crossed.
Through the waters?
Yeah, he didn't cross the
Did he
Africa,
go under South Cape, or?
No, he didn't go around the Cape.
Okay.
Supposedly no one did that till the Portuguese, but of course I think ancient
Someone
explorers, clearly Africans and,
Africans.
The Phoenicians got everywhere, and the Phoenicians might have done it.
Right.
And they're from Lebanon. So, he came back through a boat and then took the land route and got back to Venice. And he appeared in Venice and everyone was like, where have you been, right?
Right.
You left 20 years ago. Now he's 40-something.
Right.
He told the story, and his nickname in Venice was Il Milione, the million lies.
Because none of it could have been real.
We're talking about floating cities on the water and fireworks shows and women with bound feet and
paper money and coal.
And the way the Mongols fought, they would take the people of the town, whoever they could capture, and march them in front of them, so that if you were sieging a city, all your cousins and family are in front of the fucking conquering army, so you have to kill them first. If you want it.
Right.
And the Mongols could fire off somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 6 shots, maybe 10 even. And I think about every few seconds they could fire off an arrow at a full tilt gallop. So from like wild Indians.
Right.
Upside down, backwards.
Hanging off the horse.
Right. And they had superior bows to Europeans. They used an amalgam bow that they used bone and they used glue and made a bow that
was stronger.
Really, lots of tensile
reach?
strength.
Okay.
Yeah, so you could shoot through armor. So the Mongol army was 1 million people on horseback and a gajillion wagons full of arrows following behind them. And they foraged as they went.
Yeah.
And so
they lived off the land.
Yeah, they were able to conquer a good deal. And Genghis, Kublai's grandfather, or Genghis, I guess they call him.
Right.
And they say Genghis is 1 out of 5 people in the world related to him. That's how much he got around town.
Yeah.
So that's so he got, Marco. The Venetians were always at war with the Genoese, which is where Columbus is from, right?
That's right.
And the Genoese are on the water too. And the Genoese were slavers. And in the Middle Ages, they fought each other constantly. So because he was a rich person, Marco, put a galley together. I mean, it wasn't like there was an organized army. The Venetians were kind of loose. They had the Doge and all that.
Right.
Shit. So in any case, during a naval battle, he was captured. So he was thrown in jail. And it wasn't a jail like we do jails where we have these psycho, solitary confinement and make people have mental breakdowns and everybody rapes each other. They were all kind of in a big room. And because he was kind of a noble,
right?
He wasn't in the worst part. Right. And he met a cat while he was in jail named Raffaello of Pisa. And Raffaello said, "What's your bag?" And he told him the story. This is what I did for 20 years in China.
Yeah.
And Raffaello went, "This is a book."
Really?
Yes. And Raffaello wrote the book. And because it was then, Raffaello went, it has to be in French because only sophisticated people
are going to read it.
Yeah.
And it has to be in
French.
French.
So that's why we have the Adventures of Marco Polo. Now, some of it's, extrapolated.
Sure.
And Raffaello threw in lies.
Sure.
Because
he's like, well, we got to sell.
Right. He would jazz it up, right? Like Marco would go, no, you don't understand. I saw a wall of people do this. I saw 10,000 people marching in a thing. I saw, the most delicate food and the bouquets and the alcohol and the women and Raphael going, there's a place where people have feet in their heads and, people have dog heads and, let's throw that in too,
Right. They're magical, right?
Yeah,
they're leprechauns.
So it's quite a good book, Marco's book, but, you have to take some of it with a grain of salt. But I mean, the truth is he did, like I say, paper money, coal, silk, all those things the Chinese had. A banking system. They had an international banking system.
I swear to God, I've taken a class that discussed Marco Polo's book, but no one has ever assigned Marco Polo's book to me.
Yeah.
Have you read Marco Polo's book?
I've read parts of it. There's
Is it a bit of a chore?
A condensed part. Well, the writing style is real medieval, so it's like, dear reader, now let me tell you about this place. In this land, you will find that the meat and the milk, meaning the drink and the food, like everything's meat.
Oh, right.
Meat just means like what you would eat.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily mean meat. And the women are most comely, and in this place they find that they must stay on an island, and once a year the men come and visit. It's not
very linear.
Yeah. It's a bit fairy tale-y.
Okay.
There's a book by Lawrence Bergeron about the adventures, where he kind of tries to get to the facts of the story, and that one is more, I think, coherent to read.
Okay. Yeah. It's Stephen Mitchell wrote a book called The Gospel According to Jesus, which really helped me. Right,
to break down what he's talking about. Well, Jesus is so contradictory. At one point he says he's not for marriage and man and woman, and then at another point
and what Stephen Mitchell did is he essentially bled off all of the extraneous stuff, and he was like, all we're going to do is we're going to write down, and it was about 30 pages. And he said, it's what Jesus might have actually done and what Jesus might have actually said. And then he's got ancient Aramaic, and the rest of the book is explaining why he picked those 30 pages worth of nonsense. And he bases it loosely on Jefferson's, Gospel according, the Jefferson's Bible. Which I cannot remember the name of, but
Me neither.
The weird thing about Jefferson's Bible is that they printed up and gave it to every member of Congress.
Really?
Yeah. Separation of church and state, 1908. And, but every member, the House and the Senate received a copy of Jefferson's Bible, in, I think it was 1908, but whatever.
And the woman who was sworn in, or there was a Muslim sworn in, this year, but, the first Muslim that was in the Congress was a couple years ago. He swore in, cause you don't have to swear in the Bible.
Right.
And there is one like atheist who won't say she's an atheist, and she didn't swear in on anything.
Okay.
But for the one Islamic member of Congress used, now there's two, used Jefferson's Quran.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Jefferson had a copy of it.
Oh, that's awesome.
And that's what they swore in on.
Oh, good.
Yeah, isn't that fantastic?
That is. I would love to see Jefferson's Quran.
Right, and did he annotate it? He's such a pedant. Did he sit there? Is there scribbles all over it?
Right.
Are there like little pieces of paper stuffed in it where, I take exception with this part?
Right, because the Quran is clearly it was supposedly spoken through Muhammad and then repeated, right? So in Bibles where all the things said by God are in red, the Quran would be all in red.
Yes.
Right? So, did Jefferson line veto the Quran?
Quite possibly. If he didn't, he ought to have.
Yes, and of course we have nothing against Muslims.
Jefferson's so weird.
Jefferson?
Yeah.
I love that you tried to read the Marco Polo book, though. I want to try to read the Marco Polo book. Because he sounds fascinating.
One of the shallow, stores on Melrose had these little condensed history books, like they'd taken parts of books and sort of give you the hot spots. And the part of the book, of the Polo book, was like India. So it was the last part of the journey.
Okay.
And so it's all about this, he says there's an island where there's no man, and, he kind of makes up some,
Right.
And then there's one called the Romance of Alexander that was a condensed version that I gave to a very good friend of mine who passed. But, Alexander was written up well after he brought a historian with him.
Okay.
Who was Aristotle's nephew. He brought a historian because they were Greek or Hellenic, they were from Macedonia, but Aristotle was his tutor.
Right.
So his father was the king of Macedon and hegemon of the Corinthian League or whatever. Mm-hmm. And anyway, he hired Aristotle, because Aristotle was famous,
right,
to come up and teach the kids. Mm-hmm. So with a bunch of teenage boys, and Alexander being the chief prince, got their education from Aristotle.
Right.
So they knew about geography, science. It wasn't called science then.
Right.
Philosophy. And Aristotle's the one who gave him the burning curiosity, right?
Yeah.
On top of the fact that he was a monomaniacal.
Alexander.
Alexander. And that his father was a superb commander and had put this giant army together.
Yeah.
That could really kick some ass in the ancient world.
Mm-hmm.
So he had his father assassinated, most likely. His father was remarrying. Alexander's mother was named Olympias, and she was a witch, right? A Hecate.
Okay.
And she was in the Dionysian cult, where they would go into the forest and supposedly rip men to shreds and whatnot. She said Philip was his dad.
Right.
that it wasn't Philip that gave her Alexander, that Zeus appeared as a snake and copulated with her. So he was a descendant of Zeus,
yes.
which he kind of believed. And that's the weird part about ancient history too, is that like, we're to think that this person who from the age of teenager till he died at 32 and conquered from the eastern part of Europe all the way to India and back.
Right.
So his empire is extensive.
Yes.
It doesn't last. It falls apart when he
almost
dies.
Immediately,
breaks
right?
up into a bunch of different empires.
Yeah.
So Cleopatra's a Greek name.
Yeah.
The woman, the dad Philip dumps Olympia, marries a young Greek girl named Cleopatra, and at the wedding is assassinated. And Alexander makes sure that he runs down and kills the assassins immediately, so no one ever knew. So then he takes the army, subdues all of Greece, puts the army together, fucks off to Asia,
right,
and then conquers the world. But in the meantime, he sent everywhere they went. He looked for curiosities. He looked for oddities. He found things and sent them back to Greece, to Aristotle.
Oh, okay.
So he brought Aristotle's nephew with him, who he eventually had killed because everything went wrong on the road. But
sometimes you
they
get
also
bored.
Measured everywhere they went because they're Greek. They fucking counted the miles, of how far they went. So he brought a historian with him to spin everything he did into how great it was.
Right.
To write the book. Well, that book's not existent. Part of Ptolemy's books are, and he had a general, whose name I'm blanking on, Narcissus or whatever. He had an admiral.
Right.
And that he wrote a book too about Alexander. And then all these subsequent historians wrote the history of Alexander. But that got bastardized into the Middle Ages as the romance of Alexander. So in that one, he not only does he conquer the world and stuff, he flies in a machine and he meets the Amazons and all kinds of, like he's a superhero basically. It's a comic book.
Yeah.
But supposedly the Amazons, he did meet them and he had sex with the Amazon leader who came for the very express purpose of sleeping with Alexander. He was also supposed to be remarkably short, even for then. Like straight up Judy Garland.
4'11".
Yeah. Judy Garland short. And so when they finally conquered the palace, in Iraq, or was it Persepolis? I can't remember which one it was, in Iran. He walks in, he's king of Asia. They've beaten Darius and all that in a series of giant battles. And he comes in to sit on the throne and his feet are too fucking short. And the regents who worked for the previous king see how fucking short he is and panic and run and get a table and stick it under his feet so that he won't look like a kid with his feet swinging on the throne of Asia.
Oh my God.
But he fought giant battles. But Caesar was a fan of Alexander and Augustus was a fan of Alexander. And Alexander's his body was taken when he died and put in this weird glass sarcophagus, which apparently existed for hundreds of years after his death. Ptolemy was the king of Egypt, was a general and a Greek from Alexander's army and a buddy of Alexander. He got Egypt. So he started the Ptolemies, who 300 years later is Cleopatra.
Okay.
Our Cleopatra, the one we all know.
The one we all know and love.
Because that's a Greek name. It means father loving. Cleopatra. And his tomb was in Alexandria. And Caesar went and saw it. And Augustus went and saw it, who was Caesar's nephew after him, and apparently knocked the nose off of Alexander. And then it disappeared. So that's always a big thing. They're always looking for Alexander's sarcophagus and tomb and all that shit. It doesn't exist, but hardly anything of Alexander's physically exists. The coins, and that he started Alexandria, which is the most famous thing he did and the most important thing he did, because Alexandria took over as the leading learning center of the world after Athens.
Right.
So for 1,000 years.
And what year are we in now?
323 is when Alexander, BC, started his trip. So about 4 years after that, he founded Alexandria.
Okay.
And he wasn't there to watch it turn into because he croaked. Right. He only lived another 6 years.
Right.
But within
the next 100 years.
It's this meeting of Egyptian and Greek knowledge, and right at the top of the Mediterranean, right? So because he didn't think Cairo's a medieval city. Yeah. And the Egyptians, the lower or the upper Nile, right, which is the lower part, that was where all their holy cities were, Memphis and all that jazz. At the very end of the Nile, where Europe is over the other way and the Middle East that way, that's where he put his city, so that the Greeks could get there. And there was mad travel. So Cleopatra spoke Greek. She also spoke a lot of languages, but for hundreds of years, the pharaohs of Egypt didn't even speak Egyptian. They spoke Greek. And so that's why the Rosetta Stone, when Napoleon found it, is so important to deciphering the glyphs from ancient Egypt, because the stone is written in Greek, which people could read. Like we could still read it. You know, there are scholars who can read ancient Greek, and it's in glyph.
Yep.
And then, or hieroglyphics. And it's in Demotic, which was the common tongue of Egypt. So by going through, that's how they deciphered. Champollion and a series of French linguists, philologists, went through and deciphered the ancient script using that stone. And that's why the Rosetta Stone is so famous. As now you see it in the airport everywhere.
Right. Because now
it's how you decipher a language.
I think the Mormons created it. They're really good at it.
Should I be funnier when I'm talking about any of this?
No, there's no need.
I am a comedian.
I do.
Sorry. I've made myself hysterical. But the fun part of Alexander is one, he committed genocide on Asia, but the good.
It is hilarious.
He had a boyfriend. And he had several wives. He married Roxanne, right? The famous Afghanistan princess, right? Who was supposed to be the most beautiful woman in Asia. Okay. He had a later wife, and he had another baby with, and then they assassinated her and the baby. So that they could split up the empire.
That Roxanne could, Yeah.
So there would be no question, you know. Because apparently on his deathbed, all the men were gathered around him, and they said, who will lead if you pass, Xander? And he said, the strongest.
Uh-oh. Yikes.
Because that's how he played. But he had a boyfriend named Hephaestion, and Hephaestion and him went to school together, and he was his right-hand man. He wasn't the leading general in his army. He was just always there for him. And he gave him he was an officer.
Sure.
He had a unit that he commanded. And apparently when they got to Turkey, first of all, Alexander threw a spear from the boat so that it would land in Turkey, right? So that I'm taking back Asia.
Right.
Because the Greeks and the Persians have been fighting for a zillion years.
Right.
Like in the movie 300 and all that, which precedes this.
Right.
So they went to Troy. Mm-hmm. And because Alexander's favorite book was,
the Aeneid.
The Iliad, yeah.
Okay.
And he carried a copy of it kept under his pillow.
He liked it, the Iliad?
Achilles was his main man.
Oh,
and really? Achilles is, as you know, the unfeeling, heedless, brave one, right?
Pain in the ass,
right.
man.
Hector's actually a more admirable person, but Achilles is, bad to the bone. After Patroclus, his best friend, dies, he spends 3 days crying, and then saddles up and fucking fights a 7-hour battle with Hector.
Takes it back, man. Yeah. Takes it back. Yeah. We're gonna take some names.
And drags Hector's body around the city for 3 days.
3 times, yeah.
Horrible.
Horrible.
So, they went and they danced naked around the tomb and supposedly took Achilles' shield and sword. Even then there was fakery.
Right.
But he had, and through his entire 10-year campaign, Achilles' shield was his shield. Okay. Which had the Medusa on it, a Gorgon.
Okay.
Right. So that you could turn his breastplate, he had a Gorgon.
Right.
And he wore a giant white plume so he could be recognized. And Alexander led from the front, unlike any other general, the front. Before the battle started.
How did he die? And
he died of, they think maybe malaria, alcoholism, his mad wounds. He had dozens and dozens of wounds. He took an arrow to the chest in India that went all the way through his breastplate into his lungs, and they didn't think he's going to live, and he lived.
You know, in the military, when you're on the ground in a battle, if you're an officer, you take your insignia off. Yeah. So that they don't just shoot you.
No, he was the first one up the wall. The battle in India at Malya.
He might have had a Napoleon complex.
Oh, well, Napoleon had an Alexander complex and read Alexander constantly and analyzed all of his battles, and so did Caesar. They analyzed all his battles because of his... even now, I think if you talk to a general in the American army, they might say Alexander's the best general of all time. Not because he was lenient or anything like that or nice. His tactics are extraordinary. They were always outnumbered.
Like strategy-wise.
They were always outnumbered. When they fought Darius' army, one time, I think Darius had maybe 100,000 people, and they had like 30,000.
And somehow they beat him.
Because he would divide and conquer. He'd send one guy's this way. They used phalanx. They didn't fight like the Romans. The Romans had legions.
Are phalanx the lines, the four lines that come?
Right. The phalanx is a diamond, and everybody's got a giant long spear. Okay. So they march with them up.
Okay.
And then when they get to you, they come down. So it's bristling like a porcupine.
Yeah.
And that's how the Greeks fought, right? Okay. In phalanx. So, but he led the cavalry unit because he was hot dog.
Right.
And he had a group of boys with him that was the inner group. They were called the hetero, the companions. And
they were called the hetero?
The hetero. Heteroi. And they had a cry that they would go, ay. They had a battle cry and all this. So he led the cavalry unit while he had all of his other generals running the infantry.
Okay.
So when they would beat him, often he was heedless as fuck. Sometimes he'd go right into the line, and other times cut off the line and try to divide the flanks, right?
Right.
Because when the ancient army, the right flank's always the one that's coming at you. So if you could cut off the left flank, you could come behind them. And once you could come behind them, people broke and ran.
Yeah.
And that's the idea, is to get the army to disperse.
Yeah.
So you could chase them down and kill them.
Because
you don't want to fight them on the line.
Yeah.
And Alexander did that time and time again. He also destroyed the city of Tyre. He laid siege to. I think we talked about that last time.
That last time we mentioned that, yeah.
But I mean, like, so he's amazing that way. Yeah, he drank a lot, and they didn't dilute their wine. Romans put honey in their wine and pine resin.
Oh, like flavored it and stuff?
Yeah, nuts and stuff, cheese sometimes, and water.
Wine and cheese.
You cut it. Yeah.
Okay.
But Macedonians drank wine straight as it comes, and they really put it on.
Oh,
like,
wow.
They really drank.
Right,
and,
right.
He burned a town to the ground when they were drunk. He killed his friend Cletus when they were drunk. Cletus said some shit. They were having a drinks party.
Yeah.
Symposium, as we call it in Greece. And, where you lay on couches and slaves.
Sure. They peel grapes and things happen.
Dishes of wine,
Yeah.
craters. And, Cletus said, about you and shit. And Alexander went, what the fuck? And Cletus said, at Granicus, a Persian was about to cut your fucking head off, and I cut their arm off, which is a true story.
Right.
Alexander ran up the hill with his horses, crossed this riverbank. They were the first ones over. The army went shit, came through the river, hand-to-hand fighting on horses. A Persian was about to fucking do Alexander, and Cletus cut the guy's arm off at the shoulder, right?
Wow.
Saved him. So at that party, he goes, I fucking saved you, so don't even fucking start with me. You're the son of Zeus and shit. And Alexander, they separated them, they came back, they separated one of those drunk fights.
Right.
And Alexander took a spear off the wall and fucking threw it through Cletus and killed him.
And killed him because he had saved his life and dared to say, I saved your life.
At one point after Tyre, they were in Egypt, and the Egyptians were glad to see them because they had been under Persian domination for about 200 years, and they weren't that keen on the Persians. Mm-hmm, and they figured, well, the Greeks will be better than the Persians,
Yeah.
So he didn't really fight his way through Egypt. But after he's there for a few weeks, there's an oracle out in the desert called Ammon, or Siwa. Mm-hmm. And it was a dangerous trip, and he took a small group. And this is why Alexander's so legendary, obviously. Everybody tells the same.
Right.
So he takes a small group across the desert, and if you get lost, you're dead, because you got to find Siwa in 5 days, and because that's where the water is. There's an oasis there.
Right.
Siwa's still there, and there's still an oracle. And there's a big oasis full of date palms, and, it's the one little garden spot.
Right.
So they get really lost, and the fucking dirt's in their eyes, and the sand's everywhere, and there's snakes and whatnot. And a crow appears and flies, and Alexander's, that crow's for us. That's for me.
Yeah.
Zeus
sent the crow.
Mm-hmm. So they find Siwa. He goes into the oracle. The boys are standing outside. And then he goes into this inner sanctum. This is for me. And me alone. I'm going to ask the question, which is, am I the son of God?
Oh, Jesus.
So he goes in, and his bad, the priests who were there didn't speak Greek that well. And I think they misunderstood what he said. And the way they would do it was, there was a hidey hole in the wall, and a guy would hide behind it. And so when you would ask the question of the oracle, they could finally answer through. And so they said to him, he said, am I the son of Zeus? And they went, yeah, you are. And I don't know if they quite understood. And in Egypt, Zeus is Ammon. So he was Zeus Ammon, right? Mm-hmm. So when he's depicted, he's always horned with 2 ram's horns, because that's what Ammon was like. So when you see the coins from Alexander of Asia, 1, he's a European interloper.
Yep.
And 2, he's a goat god with a big fucking horn. So when he came out of the thing, they were like, what did he say? And he's like, they told me what I needed to know. Mm-hmm, that not only am I destined to conquer the world, I am the son of fucking Zeus. And therefore I am almost a god.
Myself, yes.
So all the wounds he took and all the things he did, he was, I don't know if you'd call it brave or just completely heedless.
It feels like a death wish at some point.
Very much so.
Just like,
and he dealt death too. I mean, he was put himself out there because he wasn't afraid of it, but he also killed lots and lots. You know what I mean?
Lots and lots of people.
And for fun, in between battles, hunting
of
animals.
Animals, a lot of
to kill them.
Because that's
so he was really that person. And at the same time, read philosophy.
Sure.
Read the Greek tragedies and wept over them. Like he was a cultured person, right?
Right.
He brought scientists with him on the trip. they collected information everywhere they went.
Right.
He didn't make people switch to becoming Greek. He didn't make people change their religions. He would take people and go, well, if you defied him, he would annihilate the place. If they sent out emissaries and a couple of chicks and all the gold.
Right. Yeah, it's fine.
Look, I'm in charge, but you're still in charge.
Yeah, yeah.
That's how he did it. And they did that in India. They did it all over. The Afghanis fought them the hardest, which is why I can't believe we ever invaded Afghanistan. If ancient history teaches you nothing, it's impossible
to win in Afghanistan. Yes. And then the British.
And the British. And then the Russians.
And then the Russians. And then, but we repeat.
Mm-hmm.
And the Afghans just sit there going, seriously, you're here again. All we want to do is grow some potatoes and have our lives. Yeah. Really? Nothing? Okay. Do whatever you want to do.
Oh, there's another good one since you bring it up. The biggest moment in history, in my opinion, isn't ancient Rome or Alexander. It's the moment when Europe connects to the Americas, right? Obviously, not necessarily the moment of Columbus, but within that period, because within a few years, Europe has tomatoes, potatoes, and corn.
Right.
And then coffee, tobacco, everything else, right?
Right.
And the vectors start to spread, and then all the silver from Mexico goes to China, and the whole world becomes this giant, what we know
it's
now.
Just a ball, yeah.
But there was famine like mad all through Europe. People would just die in tens of thousands. But potatoes are like the perfect food because you can literally almost exist on potatoes and nothing else.
Yeah.
They have vitamin C in them. They have vitamin D in them.
Right.
And you can bake them. You can fry them. You can
do whatever you want.
Yeah, they're pretty zany. And
did you read that Michael Pollan book? The potato pot apple book?
Oh, no.
Michael Pollan.
Is it good?
Yeah. It's essentially the history of like the three foods that changed the world.
Oh, yeah.
And one of them is pot, one of them is the apple, and one of them is the potato. Yeah. So, I mean, it's so, there's so many great.
Imagine the world without potatoes, because there was a world with half the world didn't have potatoes. Yeah.
It was a pre-potato world.
Indians invented corn. It was a wild thing growing.
Wait, like the Native American Indians invented maize?
They cultivated it. They performed horticulture on it. They bred it. They, like Gregor Mendel or whatever botanist you can think of. Mm-hmm. And there was a zillion varieties of corn because of that. Now we live in an age where all corn is that one kind of crappy corn, and Monsanto and all these people, we live in a genetically modified world now.
Right.
And there's a million kind of potatoes too, with different uses and different colors and different textures. And now they all want to boil it down to those
those
white
weird
ones, the russets or whatever.
The russets from Idaho, and
they travel. They travel and they keep.
I like But
the purple ones have more nutrition in them.
You should, I grew potatoes once. Potatoes could not be easier to grow. Yeah. I gotta show you
they grow from each other, which is the awesome part. You don't need a seed.
So do onions and garlic. I put onions and garlic out there, and because I live in Van Nuys, and if there's anything you could afford in Van Nuys, it's land, and so we have a garden because we're at war, and I have my victory garden going. But matter of fact, just pulled some awesome cucumbers off the vine.
Wow.
But yeah, you can leave with some veg if you like. But so what, okay, we're at an hour. But I did want to ask you this, have you traveled, Roman Empire? Have you done much of that?
Here and there, yeah. I've been to Aspendos in Turkey.
You've been to Turkey?
Yeah.
I was never allowed. I wasn't, when I was this close to go, my parents were like, please don't go to Turkey. And so I didn't go to Turkey, but I want to see Troy. Did you get to see Troy?
No. We were only we were in Istanbul and then southern Turkey near a town called Antalya.
Was it gorgeous?
Yeah. Stunning, which it reminded me of the Bay Area. Pine trees, and the weather was the same.
Really?
It wasn't that warm. It was like, we were there in April, and the weather in Istanbul was like San Francisco, and the weather in Antalya was too, like a little bit foggy in the morning, and then like kind of coolish.
Burns off, and
and then we saw the harbor at Antalya is a Roman harbor, so it's still the same shape because the Romans dug it out and built that fucking breakwater and made it into a a perfect horseshoe.
Yeah.
And when you sit and eat above it, you look at the Roman harbor. And then Aspendos was a Greek place. It was also a Roman place. There's a giant Colosseum there that they left.
Okay.
That we went to. I went to the top, and I said to my wife, say something. We spoke to each other.
Oh, right. Because
100 yards away.
Yep.
Because the acoustics are fabulous.
Right.
And then I've been to, in Paris and London, there's a little bit of Roman stuff left. I've been to Hadrian's Wall.
Okay.
And then there's a legionary camp outside Newcastle that I've been to.
I've been to Bath. I've been to Bath.
Oh, and Bath is deeply Roman. That's why it's Bath. I mean,
that's
they
why it's
love
Bath.
the waters, right? Anytime they could build a fucking bath, they built a bath.
But that's the only thing. I've only been to London and Bath.
Yeah.
So, whatever.
But London there's like a Roman wall kind of near the city. There's not, and dig this. So my wife and I were there in March, and we're walking down near the Thames behind where the Savoy Theatre is, like the embankment.
Okay.
And we walk up this one street, and I swear to God, I see a sign that says Roman Bath. And near a closed tube station, there's lots of closed tube stations that don't work anymore, and they just close them.
Huh.
And the tube is, how they even got it built in London. London is basically a bunch of rivers that are waiting to fill the tube with water.
Right. It's a wetland, isn't it?
The reason why all the streets in London go like this is they're following riverbeds.
Right.
And,
they're just windy as all hell.
And London is, I think, probably 30, 50 feet above London. You know what I mean? Like, there's so much many layers of London, like Tenochtitlan Lawn or whatever.
Didn't they build some sort of giant fence out in the breakwater to stop the tide?
Yeah, they tried. And they were also going to use tidal energy, but they find that everything falls apart when you stick it in the ocean because of the fury. But
right.
Yeah, I think they tried to.
I thought they did.
They just found a Roman boat. Who was digging? Bloomberg's company, I think, was digging up a part of the old city of London.
Okay.
And they found an entire Roman thing, and now they have to dig it all out and pick up all
they
the artifacts.
You can't do.
No, because everything belongs to the country. Yep. If you find a cache of Roman coins, and people find them in the countryside,
right?
Because the Romans were there for hundreds of years. You
They're
can't
not
keep
yours?
those Roman coins. No, you're supposed to give them to the National
You got to give them to the Queen?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know what would be nice? It'd be nice if they gave back the Elgin marbles, huh?
Yeah, there's a few things.
Really? I got to give you these coins? Why don't you give one of those statues back to Greece?
Which Greece petitions for every year.
Every year, it turns out. And I'm sure Greece is like, yes, thank you for saving them. That was lovely.
Yeah, that was great that you just took them.
And they could have gotten destroyed, right? They could have. But we could like them, but we could take them back at any time. Well, it turns out we have buildings now.
There's more Egyptian stuff in the British Museum. The Rosetta Stone's there. It's not in Cairo.
I know. It seems brutal.
In the Pergamon in Berlin, the entire Ishtar Gate is there from...
wow.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
They took it piecemeal and moved it. So you walk through it, and it's all that blue tile with all the dragons and griffins and everything. It's stunning. Yeah. But you think, why isn't this there? But then, of course, after what's happened in Iraq for the last 10 years, everything's probably... smashed within an inch of its.
Right. And then
Turkey makes Rome seem like 2 weeks ago because the Turkish history goes back so bloody far that you're.
Yeah.
They're Johnny come lately.
Yeah. It's and I'm sure the Indians would like us to leave as well. Anyway.
Their fervent wish.
Their fervent wish.
You ever see the Indian newspaper when you play casinos? And, it's a national Indian newspaper.
Yeah.
And obviously casinos are a giant part of their game now and everything. And on the cover of every issue, it has America in 1491.
Yep.
America now. There's two maps, and the 1491 maps all red.
All red.
Yeah.
Good times.
Yeah.
It's the last time I was up in northern Michigan, it was the summer. I was in the Upper Peninsula, and you could totally see why they're still mad because it's gorgeous and there's nobody up there. And you're like, you could leave at any time. It'll be
also,
fine.
they gave a bad rap. I mean, the Indians, first of all, there was lots of them. There was lots more. And
millions, right?
The germs that the Europeans brought really wiped them out more than anything else.
And not on purpose.
No, I mean, these are all accidents of history and stuff. The Europeans loved to blame the Americans for giving Europe syphilis, but they probably existed before then in some strain.
Who knows?
But they had high culture. Our Constitution is based on the Iroquois Constitution.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
You know, they really gave us everything. And the white people that taught the Pilgrims to live that
the
winter
Indians that taught
had been kidnapped and spoke English, and they'd been to England. And that's why Squanto and Samoset spoke English. It wasn't just some bloody coincidence. They never teach that in the history books.
Right.
They just walk in and two Indians fucking speak English in Massachusetts. They'd been to England.
Right. It turns out travel goes both ways, folks.
Mm-hmm. And it always did, and that's the big lie, I think, of history. I think the world was more connected than we ever like to imagine it is.
Yeah. Greg Proops. I'm willing to leave it on that, right? I'm willing to go. This has been great, man. Once a year, people are on board with a Greg Proops episode of The Dork Forest, as am I. And if you get a chance, please go see Greg Proops doing stand-up comedy, because I love it so.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me on, Jackie.
You're welcome. Take care of each other out there. Bye. Thanks a lot for listening to the show, everybody. You know the credits. Patrick Brady's going to fix this audio. And Mike Rickberg and Sarah Cohen sang that song in the beginning. Mike composed it. He's going to sing again in about a heartbeat, the Mexican hat dance. And Vilmos fixes the websites. Feel free to donate if you haven't donated. I'm hoping everybody gives me $100 a year. That's right. And if you don't have $100, don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. It's just tell everybody you love the show. And feel free if you like to buy merch. Maybe you want a Ranger of the Dork Forest t-shirt designed by Salmon Beemel Benrud, my nephew. Or you want a Brett Chambers designed Dork Forest t-shirt that is in green or brown, which is exciting. All American made, so they run big because they're made by Americans. Because while I'm willing to wear clothing made by toddlers, I'm unwilling to sell clothing made by toddlers. In other news, JackieCation.com has all of the information, including links to dorkforest.com and iTunes and all that stuff. Feel free to review the show. Feel free to buy stuff on Amazon. And thanks a lot for listening, you guys. Take care out there. Bye.
My hat, my hat, my hat. They're dancing around my hat. My hat, my hat, my hat. Well, what do you think of that? If it looks like a Mexican hat dance and it sounds like a Mexican hat dance, it's most likely a Mexican hat dance. So take off your hat and let's dance.
Yay! Oh my God. Why don't we just call that as the end of the show?